to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to be making a creature that I've never made before. I thought this would be a fun way to challenge myself, plus a few of you have even suggested this before. So today we are going to be making a pangolin. If you don't know what a pangolin is, the closest thing that I have to describe it would be an armadillo, except instead of bands it has these like scale type shingles across its back. Anyways, let's get started. Okay guys, the first thing we're going to start on is going to be the pattern for our creature. Now for this, because we are going to cover majority of this in fabric scales, I'm going to try and keep the pattern very simple. As you can see, I have the main body, the little legs, and the tail piece right here. And then I have two pieces to do the underbelly. One part is going to be the actual belly, and the other half is going to be the under part of the tail. And so I used the patterns to cut all my fabric out. For the sides, I decided to go with a very short plush fabric because we're not going to end up seeing this, we're going to cover it later. And then for the underbelly, I'm going with a fur fabric that matches very closely to the sides of the body. So again, I have the sides to my body, the underbelly, the inside parts of the legs, and now we can start sewing everything together. So for the first bit of sewing, I'm going to take my left and right body piece, I'm going to pin them together, and I'm going to sew down the very top of them. Now normally with my plushes, I like to close them up from the top, so that's usually the last thing we do, but with this, since that's going to be covered in scales, we need to do it the other way around. So we're going to be closing this creature up from the bottom. After that, we're going to take the inside parts of the legs and we're going to sew down the front of them, connecting them to the legs that are on the left and right body piece. Remember, you're not going to close the back of the legs, you're just going to sew down the front of them. After that, I'm going to take my belly piece and we're going to be sewing this, connecting everything together. So kind of picture the inside is kind of like the shape of a triangle. So this is the bottom of the triangle, and then the left and right body pieces are the sides of the triangle. You'll also notice that I drew a line down the middle of the belly piece, and that's because after we sew everything together, I'm going to cut this and then we're going to flip everything right side out. And this is going to give me access so I can add the wire frame and all the clay pieces later. Okay, so that's all the sewing for the body right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some of the sewing done for the scales. That way we have them ready, so when we're putting everything together, we don't have to worry about sewing those first. So I've made 3 different patterns for our scales. There's going to be a small, medium, and large. Later on we'll probably adjust this and make smaller scales, but I don't think we'll need anything larger than this. So I'm going to be making my scales in strips, that way it's kind of easier to sew on, but I will have to adjust some of these later so they fit on the body. So not all of them are going to need to be this size, some of them are going to have to be longer strips and some have to be shorter strips. So for the fabric that I'm going to use to make my scales, I'm going to be using a fake brown leather. I really like this one. It does kind of have a scale pattern, but I'm going to kind of use it anyways because I think it gives kind of a rough, crackly effect. So for the larger scales, I'm going to have both sides the fake leather, but for some of the smaller ones, I'm going to have a felt backing on one side. I'm mainly doing this because the smaller scales are going to be kind of around the base of the tail and the base of the body, and it'll be a little bit softer that way. So I've got all my fabric pinned together and all the patterns for the scales drawn on them, and I'm going to use my sewing machine to go along these lines. Now remember, you'll probably have to make a lot of scales. I ended up going through quite a bit of fake leather for this. I didn't really count out how much I needed, I just kind of did a rough estimate, so in the end I did have to make a few extra here and there. After all of my sewing is done for the scales, I'm going to cut all of them out, flip them right side out, and then when we connect them to the body, we are going to stuff them a little bit so they're a little thicker. So that's basically all the prep work for the sewing. Now we can move on to making the clay pieces. Okay, so for our clay pieces, we're going to start on the pangolin's feet first. So I have a wire frame set up for both the back and front feet. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make the claws first, then we're going to bake them for a little bit, and then we can work on shaping the feet. So for the back feet, I'm just going to be putting a tiny little bit of clay at the tip of each wire for the frame, and I'm going to shape it into a claw. Now for the front feet, because the claws are so long, I figured it would be a lot easier to sculpt them if I didn't put the wireframe together. So I don't have it all assembled yet. I'm going to end up doing that after we bake the claws. So I'm going to take some larger strips of clay and I'm going to start shaping them on these wires right now. So we're going to end up baking all of this at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about just 20 minutes. You don't need a whole lot of time. We just want it hard enough so we don't mess them up. Okay, our claws are out of the oven, and now I can put the wire frame for the front feet together. So I'm just going to take a thinner strip of wire. The wire I used for the frame is a 14 gauge, but I'm going to use a 20 gauge to wrap them together. After I have that all put together, we can start adding clay to the bottoms of the feet. So I'm just going to start applying clay to those wires and blending them into the claws and just making sure to have everything covered. So for the underparts of the hands and feet, we're not going to add a whole lot of detail, mainly because with the back feet, we're not going to end up seeing most of this. The creature's going to be standing on this part, so we don't need to add anything to it. We just need to make a nice smooth surface. And then for the front feet, because we have the claws kind of curled inwards, you're not going to see this portion, it's kind of hidden. So once we have the under part of the foot done, now we're going to start adding some scales to the tops of them. So I'm just going to take little balls of clay, I'm going to pinch them a little bit so they're kind of pointed, and I'm going to start layering them on the top of the foot. I'm going to use my tools to blend everything together and refine the shape. I'm going to do this to both the front and back feet, and once I have everything to my liking, I'm going to put this in the oven for one final bake at 275 Fahrenheit for roughly about 45 minutes. So while our clay feet are baking, I can start on the pangolin's face. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a lump of tin foil and we're going to shape it into a cone. Now it doesn't need to be super long, but the pangolin's face is pretty long. So we're just going to kind of roughly shape that, and then I'm going to put it on a glass surface, that way it's easy to move around and hold, and I'm going to start covering this in clay. So I'm going to completely cover my tin foil. Once I have it covered, I'm going to smooth my surface, kind of thin areas out, and roughly shape it into the shape of the head. Once you have a good base to work on, now we can start adding the details. Now this face is not going to have a ton of details because I'm going to end up furring most of it, but we do want to focus on making the eyes, the mouth, and the nose. And then we also have some weird little ear holes to add as well. So I'm going to start with the nose first, and I'm going to add a lump of clay to the very end of the snout. And then I'm just going to kind of blend it in and use my tools to make the nostrils and just shape everything around it. After I'm done with the nose, I'm going to work on the mouth right underneath that. So this mouth is going to be kind of tiny. You don't need to add a whole lot of detail or any extra clay to it, except maybe a few strips of clay. So my mouth, I want to be slightly open, so I'm just going to kind of use my tools to leave a little gap and to kind of give the illusion that there's a tongue in there. After that, I'm going to move on to making the eyes. So I'm going to add some balls of clay where I want the eyes to go, and then I'm going to use strips of clay to make the eyelids and shape everything around it. After I'm done with the eyes, I'm going to move on to making those little ear holes. So we're basically going to go right behind the eye, and we're just going to kind of make a little spiral going into the head. This doesn't have to go super deep, you just want to have the illusion of an opening. Lastly, I'm going to clean up my edges, and then I'm going to add a few scales right on the top of the head. I'm basically doing the same thing that I did to the tops of the feet, just adding little balls of clay, pinching them to make it kind of look a little sharp, and then using my tools to refine the shape. Once I'm happy with how my face looks, I'm going to put this in the oven as well at 275 Fahrenheit for roughly about 45 minutes. Once all the clay pieces are done baking and have cooled to touch, we can start on the painting. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to primer our clay pieces to kind of match the fur fabric. I'm mainly going to do this to the face. I don't think I need to do it to the feet very much, just mainly the back of the feet. So I'm just going to use a light khaki color, and I'm going to go over all my clay pieces. We're going to let that dry, and then we can start adding some details to everything. Okay, so how I'm going to paint this is I'm going to kind of paint everything together because all the colors are very similar, and I thought this would be a lot easier. So I'm going to start with the scales on the top of the head and the tops of the feet. So I'm going to use a dark brown for this, and I'm just going to go over everything. This is kind of like an extra primer to change the color of it. And then once my brown has dried, I'm going to go over all the claws with a nice dark gray. So we're going to get those claws painted up. I'm also going to be adding a little bit of shadowing at the base of the claws so it looks a little bit darker. After that, I'm going to go back to the scales on the feet and the face, and I'm going to go over them with a nice brown. I'm going to have this a lighter brown, and we're just going to go over the more raised portions to create a highlight. We're not going to get into all the cracks or anything like we did previously. And then I think we're done with the feet, and we just need to finish up on the face. So we're going to paint the nose a nice gray color. We might add some pinks or browns to it. We're going to make sure to paint the inside of the nostrils a nice dark color so it looks shadowed. I'm also going to be painting the inside part of the mouth a dark gray color, and then I'm adding a little bit of pink to the part that I think looks good for the tongue. After that, I'm going to work on the eyes. I'm going to paint them a nice gray color first so they take the darker colors later, and then I'm also going to be painting the inside part of the ear hole behind the eye. Once our gray on our eye has dried, I'm going to go over it with black, and then I'm going to add a white highlight to make it look reflective. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how our paint looks. I'm going to let this dry for a little bit, then I'm going to apply a thin layer of resin over everything and let them dry overnight. Once that's completely dried and cured, we can work on putting everything together for our creature. Okay, it's the following day. All of our clay pieces are ready to work with, and we can start putting our piece together. So I'm going to start by taking that fabric body that we made earlier, and I'm going to run a wire frame through it. So I've already got this wire frame made. It's a very simple frame, and I'm just going to, like I said before, run it right through, make sure all the wires for the legs are sticking through where the legs would go. Once the wire frame is inside of the body, now we need to start connecting the clay pieces to it. So I'm going to start with the legs, and if you noticed we had some wires hanging out of them, I mainly was using them to hold them, but we're also going to use them to add to the wire frame. So we're going to take that wire that's sticking out of the foot and the wire for the leg, and we're going to start wrapping them together. We're going to do this to all 4 of the feet, and then we're going to take the fabric for the legs and start gluing it around the base of the feet. So we're going to use our E6000 glue, and I'm going to use a little bit of hot glue to hold everything into place while that cures. After I have the fabric glued around the base of all the feet, I'm going to let this dry for a little bit. Once it's dried, I'm going to take my needle and thread, and I'm going to sew up the back of the leg. Once all of the legs are sewn, we can start stuffing them along with the tail. Now we're going to add the head to the piece. So I'm going to take that and a little bit of glue, and we're going to glue it onto the wire for the neck. Once that's in place, we can glue the fabric for the neck all the way around the base of the head. We're going to let that glue dry a little bit, and then once it's dried, we can work on stuffing the rest of the body and closing it up. Okay, our body is all put together, and now we just need to start decorating it. So I'm going to start by furring the pangolin's face. So I'm just going to use my E6000 glue again. I'm going to coat a nice layer over the face, and I'm going to take my fur trimmings and I'm just going to push them into the face. I'll make sure everything is completely covered with this, and then we're going to let it dry. Once it's dry, we can brush away all the extra fur that didn't stick, and then we can start working on the scales for the back of the body. Okay, so all I'm going to be doing right now is I'm going to be sewing the scales into place. So I'm going to start with just one little scale. We're starting with the smaller size first, and then we're going to work our way up to the body, and then once we get to the body, we'll probably switch to medium and then to large. So we're going to start with one scale first. We're going to sew that into place. Then we're going to grab 2 that are connected, and we're going to sew those into place. We're then going to have 3 that are connected, sew those, go back to 2, sew those, 2, 3, 2, 3, until we get to the base of the tail. Of course, if your tail is a little wider, you might have to have a row of 4, but that's okay. Just adjust to the size of your piece. Once I've gotten to the base of the tail, I'm going to stop what I'm doing and I'm going to start scaling the feet. So I'm going to work on the back feet first. I decided that the scales that we sewed together where we can stuff them are going to be a little bit too big for the legs, so these are going to be just one layer of fake leather. So I ended up cutting out a bunch of little scales that are all stripped together, and I'm going to kind of layer them down the leg. While I'm layering, I'm going to make sure to keep crisscrossing them so they kind of have a diamond pattern. We're going to do this to both of the back legs, and then we can continue going down the back of the body. So we're going to start with the larger scales now since we're on the back of the pangolin, and we're going to start sewing those into place as well. Remember, you're going to have to adjust how you put your scales on based off of the size and shape that you made the body. Once we're further up, we're going to start working on the front legs, and then once we're done with that, we're just going to keep going until we get to the neck. Once we're closer to the neck, we're going to start using smaller and smaller scales until we have to use the kind that we used on the legs. Once we have all those scales into place, we can start decorating the fur. So I'm going to start adding some colors to the belly fur. Remember, the belly fur isn't going to be this clean, bright color, so we're going to try and dirty it up a bit. And then for the face, I'm going to add some pinks and browns. I'm just going to keep adjusting until I like the look of it. Now while I was painting the fur, I decided that it was probably just going to be a whole lot easier to cover up the portions that I've already painted and resined and then just readjust them. So some of the paint ended up getting on those pieces, and instead of just wiping it off, I figured it would look better if I kind of blended it in a little bit more. So around the eyes, we ended up adjusting the eyes. I decided that I didn't want the eyelids to be so bright, so I made them gray and other details like that. Once I was happy with how the face looked, I'm going to let all of this dry, and then I'm going to apply a thin layer of resin back over those clay portions that we had to repaint. We're going to let that dry again overnight, and then our piece is all finished. Okay guys, and that's how I made a pangolin. I had so much fun making this. The scales were a lot of work, but they were well worth it, and I can't wait to try this out on maybe a different creature. Anyways guys, he's going to be in my Etsy shop, so if you're interested in buying him, check the links down below in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!